could hear a thing. Cool. So I'm Michael. I am the SecOps Director at Precursor Security. I'll just be going through a talk today about ransomware negotiation tactics. I'll actually be making reference to a genuine incident that I handled last year with a group called Lockbit. There's a bit of a reoccurring theme here. Just to get into it, a bit about who am I, what have I done, where have I been, etc. So, a bit of a weird stat actually. I actually totted up across all the incidents how many actual hours I've spent doing incident response now. It works out about 5,000 hours. So probably missed quite a lot of key events, especially over last year as things ramped up. I've responded to incidents involving Akira, Lockbit, No Escape, a few different ones. The TLDR is that they're all very much the same in terms of the groups that they are. And one key thing is I love building really good teams. Currently building one with Precursor. So we launched our Security Operations Centre this year to kind of complement the pen testing team that's been running for about 5 or 6 years now. My GitHub and Twitter's there as well. So I do a few open source, share a few tools. I'm not going to lie, most of them are written by ChatGPT. Shameless plug about Precursor, who we are, what do we do quickly. So we are a CREST certified organisation. We're partnered with the NEBRC. All the usual badges, creds, etc. that you would expect to come from a pen testing company. So I don't know if anybody's seen this episode anyways, but this is very much what I see in my head when we put forward the work stream of negotiating with a ransomware actor to the decision maker, i.e. IT manager, CISO, whoever we're dealing with in the client organisation. In this episode of The Simpsons, for anyone that doesn't know, Homer Simpson sells his soul to the devil for a donut, and he effectively takes bites from that donut as he gets more into it, and then he just loses his soul. It's from experience of doing this, that's kind of the way that I see this. Sometimes seems a bit pointless to negotiate with the threat actor. You only end up very much worse off. The data's already left. So those main organisations that you're reporting to for regulatory purposes, they don't really care that you're negotiating with them because it's already gone out the network. You get no guarantees. We know this now. There's no honour among those thieves. So yeah, you've definitely sold your soul. However, what I'll be going through here is just some of the benefits to actually doing it. A lot of people think that ransomware negotiation is just negotiate the price. And ultimately, there's a lot of other things you can actually do, such as slowing down the actor, getting intelligence. I know, Rory, at the back there, you were doing a little bit of talk earlier on about instant response and getting those answers as quick as possible for different people. And it's very much a pressurizing situation. You need to get those answers. So could we use the negotiation element to kind of slow that down, regain control of the pace of the incident, and get the answers? So the landscape so far, obviously one of the key things that have been all over the news is the main person behind Lockbit is being identified. Whether or not that's really changed much, because he's just popping back up on cybercrime forums this week as well and saying that China's, fair game as well all of a sudden. The landscape is still somewhat changing. So you've got the shaming element as well, exfiltration only as well, sec filings in the US. That's been an interesting one. So US organisations effectively have to disclose their incident to the SEC. And the problem with the way that they do things over there is you can actually report that incident on behalf of the organisation. So threat actors will, as part of the extortion element, say, if you don't pay us or you don't work with us, we can't see that you're actually cooperating throughout this exercise. We'll just tell the SEC you've had an incident. And that creates lots of regulatory fines, lots of pressure for the organisation. Again, they lose control of the incident. The exfil only element as well is interesting. So just removing encryption altogether. Like, does it really matter if the system's encrypted, if they've already stolen the data? Because that's the main impact there. The shaming element as well isn't just the SEC being an issue. I've handled incidents in the past, again, with Lockbit, where they effectively said, if you do not work with us, you don't pay this ransom, we'll just tell all of your clients that you're the proximate cause of their data loss as well. And that kind of compounds the issue. Obviously in the US as well, if they've got US clients as well, class action lawsuits well on the cards, and that company effectively ceases to exist, within about a week. It's pretty crazy. Stakeholder extortion as well, another interesting tactic that these actors will go through. So not just extorting, directly the organisation, but their investment funds. They could extort their partners, for example, as well. So it's generally quite a shared issue when an organisation of a certain size becomes ransomed, for want of a better word. So what is the benefits of actually doing this then? So as I mentioned earlier on, obviously, negotiating the price, it's going to be top of the list there, depending on what your considerations are. It ultimately depends on the impact of the incident as well, whether or not they've already stolen the data. So by paying them, does that prevent them from doing so? Mentioned earlier on, regaining control of pace of the incident as well, and that's an important part of incident management, naturally either in IT or cyber as well. So kind of feeling that control again as a cybersecurity team, but also as a board as well, feeling that you're back in control. You can send those comms out and you can say confidently what's happened so far, what do we know, what are we doing next. Threat intelligence is a huge advantage as well. So obviously getting the right person in the seat to negotiate with the threat actor, effectively getting down those objectives of what do we want to get out of this. If threat intelligence is up there and you've got the right person, they can do some analysis on the type of messaging, the narrative that individual is using that you're talking to. You can also gauge some obvious things like time zones that they're engaging you with. But then there's other things, certain indicators that they might share with you that you wouldn't otherwise get from your own network, which I'll go into as well. Proof of life is very interesting as well. It's very important to have proof of life. And we mean that by the data that's actually being stolen. Obviously, we can see the spikes on the firewall, so we can see the data's left. We could look at process usage on the system, etc., from a forensics perspective. But ultimately, a lot of this is just a claim from a threat actor being made that they've stole the data. And one of the key objectives, maybe of the board or the stakeholder or whoever's effectively responsible for the organisation, they need to go back to their stakeholders and say confidently what's been stolen, what's the impact, and what are they doing next. So you can actually go in there and ask for proof of life. You can use that to your advantage to slow down the incident as well. We've seen it with negotiators where they ask for proof of life maybe on day 3 rather than day 1. And then at day 3, they ask for that proof. They send through maybe a sample set of data. And then they can simply use that delay tactic and say, look, it's going to take us a couple of days to get through this. And by then, you're at day 5. Your forensics team is starting to flow in with some potential answers. You can start to put in some containment and start to play a bit of cat and mouse as well. Tripwires, again, probably quite obvious what you can do here. But you can almost trip the individual into sharing information that they wouldn't otherwise share or leak whilst they're on the network. It starts to introduce more of a human element there as well, assessing potentially things like the geopolitical climate that individual's stuck within as well, which I'll get into in some of the next slides. So 3 top lessons that I've learned. So the first thing when you're talking about negotiation is have a plan B. You can't just start that negotiation with just, this is how it's going to go. You're talking to a criminal. These people tend not to be wired the same as us normal individuals. Fingers crossed. And that means that, again, because you're not in control of the incident, this is going to go down potentially a few different avenues and paths, depending on what side of bed they got out of that day, depending on the way that you talk to them, depending on the plan that you've used as well. You might not get out of them what you're expecting, and that could also cause issues for the incident response team. It could also cause a bit more impact for the business as well. So this has to be very carefully planned and thought out. Not all threat actors really engage the same way. So again, a common misconception is just to go in there and say, okay, well, if we wanted to delay the incident a little bit, let's say on day 3, we're going to ask for that proof of life. But what if on day 1, as soon as you open that chat, that threat actor then goes, there's your proof of life straight away. We see that with Black Cat or Alpha V. They used to do that quite a lot to effectively stop you from using that card and delaying them with that proof of life. It's just like, here's your sample files. You need to tell me straight away if you're interested in that. Another thing that we see, which is quite common, is organizations will sometimes panic as soon as they identify that incident. They'll invoke their cyber insurance. They'll go on Google and find incident response teams. Their IT team gets on it. And what you end up with is 3, maybe 4 different organizations or teams interacting with that ransom note. And on that ransom note is typically a link to the dark web that tends to have a chat room in there. And when they click that link, what they sometimes don't realize is that can sometimes start a timer. And when that timer starts, that's it. You can't really go back from that starting. So it's not uncommon for us to land on an incident where typically a 7-day timer is now only 2 days. And the organisation's objectives are still exactly the same. It's like, well, we still want all the answers. We still want you to help us recover. And you just look at it, you go, we can't do that, unfortunately. So again, interacting with chat room links, interacting with the threat actor's ransom note, probably a bad idea. So with threat actor engagement, ransomware negotiation, one of the things that you can really do with this is regain some leverage. These are some of the questions that you can generally ask that would help you assess what leverage do you have over the threat actor and over the incident. How much of control do you actually have? So is the threat actor still in the environment? Can they move around the network? Those 2 key questions are going to tell you when you're talking to the threat actor, you probably don't want to annoy them too much, because if you haven't seen an entire encryption yet, they're not on your private cloud, they haven't moved to your public cloud yet, you probably assume if they're still in your network, they could probably do that within a few minutes, or they might have already have, and you might not have visibility of that yet as well. Another quite a comical one, again, that we see, can they see your insurance policy and your disaster recovery plan? We see it time and time again. People put their insurance policy on file servers, the CISO leaves it in their mailbox, they back it up to SharePoint, the threat actor's got it, and we see it through negotiations. And we say, look, sorry, we can only pay this amount of the ransom. Can we reduce it to 100k because that's all we can afford? And the threat actor then sends a copy of the insurance policy back and goes, well, looks like you can afford it. So again, that's a surefire way to lose leverage during that scenario. What's the value of the data? Can they cause reputational damage? So considering things like the Information Commissioner's Office, again, the SEC in the US, stakeholders and investors, you're going to put them off as well. It gets very difficult to quantify what that damage is in a long term. How do you quantify a loss of business as a result of ransomware? Maybe through reputation damage. Again, it's very difficult to quantify. So just try and eliminate unquantifiable damage by just asking, could they just cause it straight away? From the organisation's perspective, some of the ways to gain leverage is obviously be aware of your statutory notifications. So how soon do we have to report an incident to the ICO? Is that different to our insurance? We've seen it with organisations who have cyber insurance who don't want to disclose it, but actually their policy does stipulate you do still have to report it even if you don't want to make a claim and be indemnified for this. So it's very important to be aware of what your obligations actually are, because come the next year, you come to do that insurance policy and they say, well, actually, we did see you're on the dark web and it was leaked, but you didn't tell us. So that causes issues. Avoid that shaming tactic. We don't see it a lot outside of the UK, but the UK people do not like disclosing things. I don't know whether it's a cultural thing with this country, but I've time and time again speaking to different organisations, they don't like to tell their customers, they don't like to tell their stakeholders, their partners, that there's been an incident and this is what's happened. But actually, it removes that shaming tactic. If we already tell our clients what happened, it stops the likes of Lockbit from them approaching those clients and saying, actually, did you know that they've had an incident? And what we started to do was we started to record the responses that came from the end clients of these organisations and just rated whether or not they were positive or negative. And to be honest, 80 to 90% of responses that we're seeing are actually positive. Organisations are actually happy to see that they're being told that their data is being leaked through a supply chain attack, through third-party compromise, etc. They're actually quite welcoming of that. Perform a data loss impact assessment, even if it's just opening up Excel and just get a list of all that data. It can sound quite hard to do, but then categorise that data and just put a score against it, and then, just give it a lovely rag. Everyone loves red, amber, green. But ultimately, the important bit there is it helps you answer key questions like what's being stolen, what's the value of that data? Again, going back to that proof of life. If they've only stolen data that's maybe non-prod test sample data, but they're claiming it's something quite important and valuable, you've got leverage. It also means you can go back in terms of the comms process and go back to your stakeholders and say, there has been an incident, but actually through our diligence, we know that it's not as big of an issue that it was being claimed to be. And again, just being back in control of that incident. So just to take you through this and close off, I'm just going to take you through, these are genuine screenshots of chat logs from Lockbit. They're not online. Previously, when we did this, we didn't ask for photography, but since Lockbit's all kind of being caught up with, probably be a good opportunity to share these and just show the inner workings of the way that some of these negotiations actually go. Because that's a bit small, I've just highlighted some bits of text, but for the back, probably, there's some claims made in this email that's sent to the victim organisation. So we were able to access most of your clients. A bit scary. I'll be forced to attack your clients and disable their systems. As well as disclosing data from their servers, we will put you as the initial vector of all of these attacks. So again, you've got that proximate cause coming back into the single organisation for what was actually 50 other organisations around the world. And there was all sorts of different jurisdictions as well, so you can imagine the potential dumpster fire that was in front of us on an email. They'd also pointed out along the bottom there is, mail is not safe, and we're also aware of your latest transactions. Now, obviously, you can go through scoping, you can sit down with the client in incident response engagements and try and discover what's the organisation doing right now, what's their key events, what are they focusing on as a business. But again, unless the business is forthcoming and gives you all the right information, you're none the wiser. Now, this organisation didn't actually tell us at that moment that they were approaching a merger and acquisition. Lockbit knew, we didn't, and we didn't actually know until months after the incident, and that's what that statement meant. They'd been reading all the emails, they knew that the business was looking to sell off, so potentially the impact of this was that that deal was not going to go through. So what happened was, in that email, they invited us to hop on, it's an anonymous peer-to-peer chat called Tox, or QTox. And effectively, you find other users on that platform by you get given a very long string, characters and numbers. It's a very good platform for obviously remaining anonymous, and then talking to people for the purposes of ransomware negotiation. So we joined that. We got a professional negotiator, kind of ex-Met Police. He had all the war stories, and he joined the chat and really wanted to collect things to evidential standard. But also he wanted to really delay things and see what intelligence he can glean from this. And straight away, the way that Lockbit actually opened this up with was, he said, actually, this is not all the evidence we've got. I'm not at home yet. He claims he's actually in hospital with his daughter. And actually, we're maybe going to have to wait until about Feb 3rd or the 5th to get a proof of life, which worked for us, but at the same time, you could see that they were already trying to employ that pity tactic. Whether or not it was perfectly true, we're not sure, but it definitely felt like they were trying to delay something. That could have been based on where they were in the network. Maybe they knew we were deploying EDR and they were trying to delay us. We're not sure, but that's what the tactic was. And then at some point, they also mentioned that this person might actually be being sent to war. So obviously, playing on potential Russian-Ukraine conflict here. We thought this person was already Russian. We thought Lockbit already were anyways. So it only made sense that potentially they were making a link to that conflict. That made us build up a potential profile physically of that individual. If that person's fit to go to war, it's very easy to build a profile of who they are. And they mentioned, okay, the government wants to send them to war. So is that going to come round soon? Is that going to cause any issues? Then they made quite a big, epic fail. So OPSEC, if nobody's heard of that term, is operational security. That's all about protecting yourself from effectively being exposed. And OPSEC is naturally a big part of being a ransomware actor. It would be very silly if everybody knew your name, where you lived, etc., who you were. It wouldn't really work unless obviously you lived in Russia, which I think the FBI have proved so far that exposing the guy behind Lockbit, it doesn't really make much difference. But what he did on Tox was he went quiet for 2 weeks. And then he came back and went, sorry, been a bit busy, countries at war and all that. But if you want to keep in touch, here's an email. And I was like, yeah, nice and useful. Love the customer service. And as you do an incident response, you sat there at night and you're watching the TV and then your brain just clicks and you're like, hang on. He gave us an Outlook.com email address. It wasn't Proton Mail. It wasn't something where it would be difficult to find out who that individual might be. So I just hopped on Twitter, hopped on LinkedIn. I was like, who knows Microsoft Star Team? Who knows people in law enforcement? I've got some potential TLP red intelligence on Lockbit. Can't share it. Need NDAs. Someone reached out. They said, I can put you in touch with Microsoft. What do you need? We signed mutual NDAs. And then we shared this Outlook address. And then they came back and actually said, we've identified that actually an IP address is linked to Canada for the person who registered this email address. And we've also been able to find a genuine person and link that to a human in Canada. Do you have any more intelligence that can prove that this person that you're talking to on Tox is also the person that is implicating the attack on your end client and these 50 other organisations? So we just went away and was like, yeah, hands on deck, get a full threat intelligence pack. Here's all the IOCs and just threw it all out with permission from the client. And it went a bit quiet. They said, thanks for that. We hopped on a call with the NCA, the NCSC, etc. And obviously people have very few words in those kind of agencies. It went quiet. A couple of months actually passed. And at this point, obviously the incident had kind of been put to sleep because the threat actor just disappeared off Tox. So it was like last online a few weeks ago, and it was like, well, you kind of wanted to pay the ransom, but whatever. So the company recovered, etc. And then the contact that put me in touch with Microsoft originally texted me on Signal and said, just watch the news with an eyes emoji. I was like, well, there's lots to watch on the news. I was like, I haven't got time to watch the news. And then this popped up, which is that article along the bottom. And it was on the US DOJ's website. You can Google that title, you'll find the link. And a Russian national had been arrested in Canada, and they'd actually listed the alias that person goes by on Tox, which was the exact alias that we'd been talking to. At this point, it was like offline for like 3 months when we logged back on the Tox to have a look. So it was quite an interesting incident where we went from obviously having no leverage at all, getting somebody in who can regain that leverage, get the comms out to the clients, and then also realising that there's a lot more benefit to doing ransomware negotiation than just talking about the price. That's it. Going to come to a very abrupt end. But if anybody would like to chat after, any questions, just give me a shout. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and GitHub. Thanks.
You've got 5 minutes left if you do want to take questions.
Got 5 for questions if anyone's got questions. Easy. All right. Thanks very much.
I've got a question for Brad. Do you recommend any specific OPSEC around things like threats and mates and things like that? Or things like virus total?
Yeah, like how to kind of analyse a ransom note safely. If there's links, like don't click them, don't put them in sandboxes. Researchers will be looking for onion links appearing in VirusTotal and stuff. Apart from that, they don't leave a great deal to interact with, but again, we do see organisations just replying straight back to the email, which acknowledges the incident as well. You can kind of leave the threat actor in the dark a little bit by not replying back to that email, and they tend to send a couple more and be like, do you know that he's encrypted? Well, obviously, but so apart from that, yeah, it's just not to interact with it.
So that's point about not uploading malware to a virus station.
Yeah.
People who've got enterprise licenses.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Thoughts on the data valuation aspect you mentioned and what's on the server and like obviously protecting those servers in advance of like
the $1 million question. It depends. Let's give you that consultancy answer. We obviously see a lot of exfil from SharePoint because that's the easiest place to do it. Easiest way to scale it as a threat actor. But file servers tends to be domain joined. So it's SMB1 having default shares enabled. But you're back into that realm of trying to protect AD, which I think has been like a multiple decade mission now. But yeah, SharePoint seems to be probably the worst place for it. And I would argue a little bit easier to protect than just a file share that's on a network.
so whilst SharePoint's more accessible, you've got the logs of what happened.
Yeah.
And they should have that in place, so therefore it's part of the game.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
No worries.